Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. First things first, I wanted to wish you a very happy new year. I hope that 2025 is just filled with blessings and happiness for you. I also wanted to send out a very special thank you because, believe it or not, there are now 4,000 and counting of us here at Jorge's Corner. So I am, of course, incredibly grateful and happy about that. And I do hope that you are enjoying the content that I am sharing with you here. This video is really about a novel. I'm going to tell you about that very soon, but I wanted to complement it or supplement it, whatever the term happens to be here, with this little thing. I wanted to show you what I got for Christmas. I wanted to show you the bag also because I really liked it. It says Star of Wonder. And as you may know, if you have watched some of my previous videos, most of the time for Christmas and for my birthday, what I do is I choose one movie, one book, and one album. This time I also got a TV series that I had been really looking forward to get. So let me start with that, since it's the first thing that I am seeing right here. I was missing the complete Thundercats TV program. So I was really, I grew up with this. I really like it. And I really look forward to the opportunity to watch all of these, cartoons or episodes again. For the CD, I did Blondie, the debut album. I listened to it the other day and I really enjoyed it. I got a Criterion Collection movie that I was not able to find on Amazon, so I had to order it directly from the Criterion webpage, and that is Sundays and Cybele. It's a film that got the Academy Award for Best International Picture back in the day. This movie is from 1962. It's about a soldier who comes back and is trying to, reintegrate himself after having had very traumatic experiences in combat. So I have seen the film, but it was a very long time ago, and I wanted to experience it again with some extras that you can always expect in the Criterion release. And then, very importantly, last but not least, I was missing, believe it or not, a copy of Demons, also known as The Possessed, by, of course, Fyodor Dostoevsky. So I want to reread this because I did not have the kind of experience that I was expecting to back in the time when I read it. It was a very difficult time also that I chose to read it. My mother was at the hospital, so I had a lot of stuff going on while I was reading. So that probably had a lot to do with the fact that I did not enjoy the novel as much as I was hoping to. So I want to have another experience of it. And by the way, the translation, because that is important when we're talking about Dostoevsky, is the PVR and Bolokonsky one. So the latest important ones. This is the Everyman's Library edition, which is the same one that I read a few years ago when I experienced it for the first time. So let's get to business right now. I have here with me one of the most important Italian novels of the 20th century, and that is La coscienza di Zeno, Zeno's Conscience, by Italo Svevo, from the year 1923. Now, I want to tell you how it was that I arrived at this book. A couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago or so, I was reading a book of interviews with Adolfo Bioy Casares, who is one of my favorite authors ever. Please feel free to check out my videos on him. I did an author spotlight showing you all of his books, and I also did a video on one of his novels, Diary of the War of the Pig. But anyway, I was reading this book, and at one point, Bioy Casares says that he recommends that people read Italo Svevo, and he tells us also that Svevo is Leopold Bloom. But then he adds that Zeno's Conscience is a book that he constantly rereads. And he also says that he saw Italo Svevo as a brother. So that is quite a statement coming from an author. And I was like, this is coming from Bioy, so I love this guy, really. So I really need to read this book and to check out something at least by Italo Svevo. So Zeno's Conscience, I would say, could be described as a psychological novel, but it is also a novel about psychoanalysis. It is not exactly the same thing. It is a very introspective text, and I would say because of that, it's kind of a direct descendant of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. It's that kind of intimista, this is a word that I have used before in Spanish, type of literature. So I'm going to tell you something that maybe doesn't need to be said, but strictly speaking, you're not going to find a lot of plot here in this novel. Instead, what you find is basically a world view. You have ideas about the human condition, and there are events here, but whenever you have events that are narrated or related to us, the purpose that they serve is basically to illustrate or to punctuate all of these ideas, reflections, impressions that this character Zeno decides to share with us. He's a narrator protagonist. So if there is a story in this novel, it is the story of the Malfenti family. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that soon, but it is presented in a fragmentary fashion. So that is one important thing to keep in mind about this novel. And regarding the structure, what we are looking at here is we have 437 pages exactly, and the story is divided into 6 chapters. But we also have a preface by Zeno's doctor, because he is the one who told this guy that it would be a good idea for him to write his autobiography. And we also have a preamble, that is the way it is called, by Zeno himself, maybe explaining a little bit why he's going into this narration of his life. So listen to the titles of the chapters, because I think most of them, if not all, are pretty much self-explanatory. Smoke, My Father's Death, The Story of My Marriage, Wife and Mistress, The Story of a Business Partnership, and finally Psychoanalysis. That is the last chapter that he devotes to this exploration of psychoanalysis. I think if I had to add a subtitle to this novel, right, it would be Zeno's Conscience, Love and Business, because basically what we have here, the events that Zeno is narrating to us, have mostly to do with his involvement with the Malfenti family, and he is tied to this family by bonds of both business and love, or whatever you want to call it, because love is kind of a weird word when we speak about the connection that he has with the family. So he tells us a little bit about his smoking habit. That is because the first title, that's the reason why it's titled Smoke. This guy is always smoking his last cigarette, okay? It's always the last one, quote unquote. He also tells us about his pursuit of one of the Malfenti girls and his marriage to another one. I'm going to let you find that out for yourself as you read the story. His business partnership also with his brother-in-law Guido. We hear about his admiration for Giovanni, who is the head of the family. We hear also about his relationship with his lover. And finally, in the last chapter, which is titled Psychoanalysis, about Zeno's disdain for psychoanalysis, which he considers to be basically a hoax. That is his idea of what psychoanalysis is. He's very, very critical. So as I told you, we have at the center here a protagonist slash narrator, guy by the name of Zeno. So who is Zeno? At the beginning of the story, he tells us that he is 57 years old. He is the type of narrator, I think, and I would say, who hides behind those 2 masks that are very common, which are irony and sarcasm. But I think that if you take off those masks, what lies beneath, what I see beneath those masks, is just a very vulnerable man. He is also quite honest. He's brutally honest, I would say. He tells us really directly about his shortcomings. He tells us, for example, about his jealousy, about his guilt, about his selfishness, about his lack of sensitivity in some cases. And then, very, very importantly, he also tells us, quite frankly, about his phobias, about his hypochondria, because that is really the name for it. And I think the fact is that Zeno does not really have much of an individual self. He tells us at one point that when he admires somebody, he does his absolute best to resemble that person. That would be his relationship with Giovanni, the head of the family. So when I read that, I couldn't help thinking about a movie. A favorite of mine, really. It's usually here where this empty space is, and that is Selig. Okay, this great mockumentary by Woody Allen about this chameleon man, this man who is constantly taking on the mannerisms of someone else. So I would say Zeno, one way to describe him would be really as a man with no qualities, a man without qualities, quite literally. But there is one thing that we have to say about him that is actually quite important to the text and to the story. And that is that this guy is really hilarious. He has a very interesting and very personal sense of humor. And he is funny also himself because he is absurd. he is really a pathetic figure. So let me give you a couple of examples about that. One of the main reasons why he fears death, for example, is connected to his jealousy, because he thinks, oh my gosh, as soon as I am dead, my wife is going to replace me with somebody else. And you think, what's it to you if you're dead, right? And he doesn't know if he will be able to see his wife after death or anything like that. Well, the idea just terrifies him. So I think that really speaks volumes about this pathological jealousy and this phobia that he has. At another point, somebody asks him whether his wife is beautiful. And he says, well, it's a matter of taste. So, all of these things, when I'm telling you that this guy is really telling us a lot about himself, he is really giving himself away in this autobiography that he wrote. And then there's a part that I thought was really interesting where he makes a pass at his brother-in-law's lover. And he actually thinks that if the two of them, right, him and his brother-in-law, share a lover, that would in fact be beneficial to their wives, believe it or not. So the reason or the rationale that he gives for that, let me read you this. This is on page 295. He says, both of their wives, right, would have been betrayed far less than if Guido and I had had a whole woman each. So he's like, we have half a lover actually because we're sharing her. So you know what I mean? It's that kind of humor, that kind of sarcasm, or in many cases it's not really sarcasm. He's being honest about how he feels about these things, and it just happens to be really a very kind of a strange way of looking at it, though definitely a very original way of doing that. So let me share now my impressions on this reading experience that I had. The question here is, did I enjoy it as much as I was hoping to? Well, remember that the recommendation came from Bioy Casares for me. So I put the novel really on a pedestal, and in my personal case, maybe I have to say that that was a bit of a high pedestal, maybe a little bit too high. I do not consider Xenos Conscience to be one of the best novels that I have ever read, but I'm going to say that I really, really enjoyed it nevertheless. And I believe that if you like Proust, for example, Marcel Proust, I think that you're going to love Xenos Conscience. It is not the same thing, I have to say that. It will never be the same thing, but there are many points of connection there between the work of Proust and this novel, at least, by Italo Svevo. I also think that if you like Thomas Mann, for example, you may very well enjoy this novel and it might appeal to you. So I think, even though I did not enjoy it as much as I was expecting to, I would say that it is really a novel that is worth reading because it has just a delightful style, and this is very important to really deep insight. So I would say out of 5 stars, I would probably give it 4, okay? So the bottom line is that I think that Xenos Conscience would definitely make the list if we were to choose the 10 most important Italian novels. So we are talking about a text that really is quite important, and I don't really know why it does not get more attention, especially here in the US. I am speaking about the US because this is the context that I am the most familiar with. I don't really know anybody who has read it, and I would actually like to ask you, do you know anybody who has read this novel? Have you read it yourself? And I think really it does need more readers. Besides being all that I told you that it is also a great novel of manners. Okay, and I'm going to say more than that. I think that if Jane Austen had been born in Italy as a man in the 20th century, she would have written Xenos Conscience. That I'm going to say that, okay? I really, really mean that. We have quite an insight into the society around this guy, Zeno. So, I would say check it out, okay? I think it's worth your time, and I think it definitely deserves more readers. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Please send them my way. You know that they are always welcome. Those were my 2 cents on Xenos Conscience by Italo Svevo. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.